to Murderous Minds Monday, where we cover the most notorious and sadistic serial killers of the modern age. This is part 2 of covering Ted Bundy. If you missed part 1, go watch that. I'll link it down below so you can go catch up on that and then come back to this video to learn part 2. But today we're going to be covering the next part of Ted Bundy and the murders that he commits. So stay tight, grab your popcorn and a snack because it's going to be a long one, and let's get on with part 2 of Ted Bundy. So we left off last time with Ted Bundy and police still searching for him. So on the 16th of August 1975, Sergeant Bob Haywood was patrolling his area around the Salt Lake City area when he spotted a suspicious tan VW Beetle, which he hadn't seen before. He patrolled this area many times before and kind of knew everyone that kind of lived in the area and the cars that he would sort of see. He couldn't remember ever seeing a VW Beetle in that area ever before. When he turned his lights on to view the VW a bit more and to get a better look at it, the VW turned its engine on and sped away. So Sergeant Haywood immediately saw this as a red flag and started to chase the Beetle. And the Beetle actually drove through 2 stop signs without stopping. And eventually he did pull over into a petrol station. Haywood watched the driver get out of the vehicle and approach the police car. He asked the driver for his license and registration for the car, and this read Theodore Robert Bundy. So just as he was completing his checks, 2 more police cars pulled in to the petrol station, and they noticed that the passenger seat of Bundy's car was missing, which mounted quite a bit of suspicion as to why he'd taken this out. With Bundy's permission, the police officers searched Bundy's vehicle. What they found was a crowbar, a ski mask, rope, handcuffs, wire, and an ice pick. So not the usual things that you would just have in your car for no reason. With all of these items being found, it mounted a lot of suspicion of Bundy, and he was placed under arrest on suspicion of burglary. Because he had travelled states, not all states were in communication, so they didn't know that he was an escaped prisoner. Soon after his arrest, the police found connections between him and Carol Doranch. The handcuffs that were found in his car were the same that had been found on the woman who had gone to the police station after being attacked by a man. And also the car that Bundy was driving was very similar to the car that Carol had described the security guard of driving. So there's just a lot of similarities that they're finding. They also suspected that Ted Bundy was responsible for kidnapping Melissa Smith, Laura Amy, and Debbie Kent. There were just too many similarities that the police found that they just couldn't ignore all of this evidence, basically. However, they needed more evidence against Bundy to be able to actually charge him in the cases. On the 2nd of October 1975, Carol DeBouch, along with the director from the school play and a friend of Debbie Kent's, arrived at the police station to identify if Ted Bundy was the man that they'd seen. The friend of Debbie Kent and the director of the play all picked Ted Bundy out of the lineup. However, Ted Bundy did try to plead his innocence, but although he tried to do this, police didn't believe him, and a full-blown investigation was launched into Theodore Robert Bundy. During the autumn of 1975, police spoke to Elizabeth Kendall, who was Ted's girlfriend, for any information she was able to provide them about Ted. They believed that Elizabeth would be a key to Ted's whereabouts, so that they could find out where he was on the night of all these attacks, his habits and his personality. What they learned helped link Ted to all the murder victims. On the 16th of September 1975, Elizabeth was called to the Kings County Police Major Crime Unit in Washington, and she was interviewed by Detective Jerry Thompson. Elizabeth was visibly nervous and stressed about this situation. Obviously, Ted is her boyfriend still, so there's obviously that love there for him, but she was willing to help police whatever way that she could. When she was asked about Ted's whereabouts on the night of the murders and the attacks, she actually recalled that she didn't know where Ted was on those nights. Like, she couldn't account for where he would have been. She also told police that he would often sleep during the day and go out at night, and she didn't know where he actually went when he went out at night. She also stated that his interest in having sex with her had actually gone down in the last year. He did show interest and pressured her into trying bondage. When she told Ted that she no longer wanted bondage sex, he was very upset with her. In a later interview, Elizabeth actually stated that Ted had plaster of Paris to make casts in his bedroom, which she noticed when they'd first started dating. She also noticed later that in his car he had a hatchet, but there was something more important that Elizabeth would actually remember. She recalled that Ted had visited Lake Samish Park in July, where he had apparently gone water skiing. A week after Ted had gone to the park, Janice Ott and Denise Naslund were reported missing. So that's a very strong coincidence. Elizabeth went through hours of interviews with the police, giving them all the information about Ted that she could. I just think this must have been so difficult for her. Imagine loving someone so much but having to give evidence against them to police. Evidence which could mean that they end up in prison or worse. And then police turned their investigation to his ex-girlfriend in California. When police contacted her, she told them how he had suddenly changed his mannerisms and had gone from really loving her and being like, I can see a future with you, to just completely ghosting her basically. And also they found out that his relationship with the woman in California had overlapped with Elizabeth. Ted seemed to live a double life, and his lives were just full of denial and betrayal. Further evidence found would actually later connect Ted to another one of his victims. Linda Ann Healy was linked to Ted through a cousin of his. More eyewitnesses would actually recognise him from Lake Samish Park during the time that Ott and Naslund disappeared. Also, an old friend came forward saying he had seen pantyhose in the glove compartment of Ted's car. Plus, he had spent a lot of time in the Taylor Mountains where some more of the victims' bodies were found. Ted's innocence was actually further tested when police discovered he purchased petrol on a credit card in the towns where the girls had gone missing, around the same time that they had gone missing as well. So this just kept piling up all this evidence to connect Ted to the disappearances and the murders of these women. Also, a friend had seen him with his arm in a cast when there was no record of him ever breaking his arm. The evidence against Ted was mounting up, but he still professed his innocence. On the 23rd of February 1976, Ted was put on trial for the kidnapping of Carol Daronch. Ted sat in the courtroom very relaxed, confident that he would actually be found innocent of this attack. He believed that there was no hard evidence against him, but he couldn't have been more wrong in this situation. Carol Daronch took the stand and recalled the ordeal that she had been through with Ted. She was asked if she was able to recognise her attacker in the courtroom, and she pointed straight at Ted and said that he had called himself Officer Rosland. The people in the courtroom turned their attention to Ted, who just hard stared at Carol. Later in the trial, Ted claimed that he had never seen the defendant, but he had no alibi to confirm his whereabouts the day of the attack. The judge spent the weekend reviewing the case against Ted before he handed out his sentence 2 days later, he found Ted guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of aggravated kidnapping, and Ted was sentenced on the 30th of June to serve 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole. They carried out a psychological evaluation on Ted while he was in prison at the court's request. They found Ted to be neither psychotic, neurotic, or to be addicted to any substances or to suffer with any character disorder. So he was mentally sane. As mentally sane as you can be for someone who's a serial killer. They concluded that he had a strong dependency on women, and upon further evaluation, they feared that Ted had been humiliated in his relationships with women, and that's why he had such a issue with them. While Bundy was in the Utah State Prison, the police began to search for evidence connecting him to the murders of Karen Campbell and Melissa Smith. Ted didn't realise that his legal situation would actually escalate further. Detectives discovered in Ted's VW Beetle hairs which, when they were examined by the FBI, were to be found characteristically alike to Karen's and Melissa's hair. Further examination of Karen's remains, it showed that her skull had the impression made by a blunt object, and this matched the crowbar which was found in Ted's car. So all this evidence is mounting up against Ted. Colorado police then filed these charges against Ted Bundy on the 22nd of October 1976 for the murder of Karen Campbell. In April 1977, Ted was transferred to Garfield County Jail in Colorado to await his trial in the murder of Karen Campbell. While preparing for the case, Ted became very unhappy with his legal representation and actually fired them, believing that he could represent himself better. He felt that he would succeed in this, and the trial was scheduled for the 14th of November 1977. He was granted leave of the jail to use the library to prepare for his defence, but what the police didn't realise was he was actually planning to escape. On the 7th of June, during one of his visits to the library, Ted actually managed to jump from an open window. He damaged his ankle but managed to proceed with his escape and blend in with the people outside the library. It was an escape that he had planned for quite a while he was having these trips to the library, and Aspen police quickly set up roadblocks around the city, but Ted remained in the city limits, so he was never going to get caught by these roadblocks. Police launched a massive land search for Ted using scent tracking bloodhounds and about 150 searchers in hope of catching Ted. However, he was able to elude them for days. While on the run, Ted managed to survive off of food that he stole from local cabins and nearby campers, and he would occasionally sleep in one of these abandoned cabins. But Ted realised that he actually needed a car to be able to get around and to be able to pass through the blocks easily. Ted believed that he was destined to be free, like he shouldn't be in jail, he hasn't done anything wrong, he should be free. Ted thought that he was invincible, and he claimed that nothing went wrong, and if it did go wrong, it went wrong in a way that it actually helped him out in the future. So he was a very lucky guy, according to himself. Bundy found his ticket out of town when he discovered a car with keys in the ignition, but his luck was about to run out. While trying to flee Aspen in the stolen car, he was spotted and arrested again by police. From then on, he was ordered to wear handcuffs and leg irons while he was conducting his research in the library. However, Ted did not like to be tied down or restricted. Sucks to be him, to be honest. Almost 7 months after his escape, Ted attempted to escape again, but this time he was more successful. On the 30th of December, he crawled up into the ceiling of the Garfield County Jail and made his way to another part of the building. He found another opening in the ceiling that led down to the closet of the janitor. He sat and waited until he knew that the apartment was empty, and then he casually just walked out the front door without being asked any questions, just walked out the front door. His escape would actually go undiscovered until that afternoon, which was actually 15 hours after he had escapes the jail, which is crazy. Why is no one watching him? Like, he's such a dangerous man and they're just not there's no one keeping an eye on him. By the time that the police noticed that Ted had escaped, Ted was already on his way to Chicago. Chicago was one of the few stops that Ted had planned. His final destination, or his goal final destination, was Florida. By mid-January 1978, Ted used a new name of Chris Hagen, and he had settled into a one-bed flat in Tallahassee in Florida. He'd made it. Ted enjoyed his newfound freedom. People in the area knew nothing of his past or that he was a serial killer. He was stimulated by intelligence and youth, and he felt comfortable in his new environment near Florida State University. I can't believe there's no like background checks on people who are going to live near a university. Strange. He would walk around the campus quite regularly, and he would occasionally sneak into classes unnoticed and listen to the lectures. While he was not going around the campus, he would actually spend his time in his apartment watching the television that he had stolen. Thieving just became second nature to Ted. He bought most of his food on stolen credit cards. Everything in his apartment was stolen. There wasn't a single thing he'd actually bought legally. Because I'm guessing at the time he couldn't get a job because he was going by a fake name but didn't have any documents to prove that name. Only thing that he didn't have, and the thing that he actually wanted most in the world, was companionship. He was all alone in Florida. On Saturday the 14th of January, a few of the sorority sisters could be found at the Chi Omega house. Most of them were out dancing or at keg parties on the campus, and it wasn't unusual for the sisters to stay out late since there was no curfew. And it was normal for the sorority sisters to return to their rooms in the early hours of the morning. However, none of the sisters were prepared to confront the horror that awaited them back at the sorority house later that night. At 3 a.m, Nita Neary was dropped off at the house and realised that it had been burgled. She ran straight upstairs to wake her roommate Nancy. Nita told her that she saw a strange man leaving the building. Unsure what to do, the girls made their way to the house mother's room. Before they made it to the house mother's room, they saw another housemate, Karen, staggering out of her room with blood on her head. While Nancy tried to help Karen, Nita woke up the house mother, and the two of them went to check on the other roommates. They found Kathy in her room, alive, but she was in a terrible, terrible state. She was also covered in blood, and it was seeping from an open wound on her head. Nancy ran to the phone and rang 911. Police would come to the home, and later they found two girls dead in their rooms, lying in their beds. Someone had attacked them while they were sleeping. Lisa Levy was the first girl the officers found, and pathologists performed an autopsy later and found that she had been beaten in the head with a log, raped and strangled. They also discovered bite marks on her bum and one on her nipple. In fact, her nipple had been so severely bitten that it was almost completely taken off. She had also been sexually assaulted with a hairspray bottle. Like, this is a horrific, horrific attack. The other girl that was found was Margaret Bowman. An autopsy showed that she had suffered similar fatal head injuries. However, she had not been sexually assaulted, and she showed no signs of bite marks. She had been strangled by a pair of pantyhose that were later found at the crime scene. She had also been beaten in the head so severely that her skull had actually splintered, and a portion of her brain was exposed. Neither her nor Lisa showed any signs of struggle, so this meant that they must have been fully asleep when the attack happened. Like, they had no idea that this happened, which is the only kind of good thing about this, I suppose, is that they weren't aware that this happened, and it would have been so quick that they wouldn't have woken up. But again, Ugh. Police interviewed the survivors and learned nothing. None of the girls had any memory of events. Like Levy and Bowman, they had been attacked in their sleep, so they weren't awake and they didn't see their attacker. The only witness was Nita Neary, who had seen the attacker fleeing the scene as she came home, but he would not travel far before he claimed another victim. Less than a mile from the Chi Omega house, a young woman was woken by a loud banging noise coming from the apartment next to her. She wondered what her friend was doing in the adjoining room that would be making so much noise at 4 a.m. As the banging noise carried on, she became suspicious and woke her roommate. As they listened, they heard Cheryl next door moaning, and so they called the police over from the house to see if she was okay. As they listened, they heard Cheryl moaning, so they went over to her place and knocked on the door, but no one answered. And when Cheryl didn't answer, they phoned the police. The police arrived very quickly, as obviously they were just a mile down the road at the Chi Omega house, and they entered Cheryl's apartment, walked into her bedroom, and they found her laying on her bed. Her face was beginning to swell from the beating to her head, but she was still semi-conscious, but she was nude and lucky to be alive. Police discovered a mask at the foot of her bed. This mask resembled almost an exact match to the mask that was taken from Bundy's car when he'd been arrested in Utah in 1975. What I want to know is how he still had that mask. Or did he go and buy another one that was exactly the same? It just seems a bit strange. The police worked to collect all the evidence they could from the crime scene, and they were able to get a blood type from the attacker and a sample of their sperm and fingerprint smudges. So there was quite a lot of evidence left. He'd been very sloppy. However, most of the evidence collected was inconclusive. The only firm evidence they had were the hairs that were found in the mask, the teeth impression from the bite mark, and an eyewitness account from Nita. Ted Bundy was not a suspect as he was not known to the police in that area. Obviously, they didn't know that he'd escaped to that area, so they wouldn't be looking for him and they wouldn't suspect him in this. On the 9th of February 1978, Lake City Police received a phone call from distressed parents of a 12-year-old called Kimberly Leach. They were hysterical as their daughter had disappeared that day. Police launched a massive investigation to find the 12-year-old girl who had actually disappeared from the school grounds. The last person to see her was her friend Priscilla, who saw Kimberly getting into the car of a strange man. Unfortunately, she was not able to accurately remember the car or the driver. They found Kimberly's body 8 weeks later in the state park in Suwannee County in Florida. The young girl's body held little evidence due to the advanced decomposition that had gone on. However, the police were able to find the evidence they needed in a van that was driven by Ted. A few days before Kimberly Leach's disappearance, a strange man in a white van approached a 14-year-old girl as she waited for her brother to pick her up from a club that she was attending. The man claimed that he was from the fire department and asked her if she attended the school nearby. She found it strange that an on-duty fireman was wearing plaid pants and a navy jacket. Like, it just didn't make sense to her. She had been warned on many occasions by her father about talking to strangers, and her father was the chief of detectives in the Jacksonville police. So she heeded this warning quite well. She was relieved when her brother did finally come and pick her up. Her brother ordered her to get into the car, and he followed the man and wrote down the license plate to give to his father. When his father heard about this encounter, he ran the license plate and he learned that it belonged to a man named Randall Reagan and decided to pay Randall a visit. Randall then informed him that his plates had been stolen and he'd already been issued with new ones, so it wasn't him that was driving this van. The detectives later found that the van his children saw was stolen, so he had an idea who it might be. He decided to take his children to the police station and show them a mugshot of Bundy, and he didn't realise how close he had been to losing his daughter to Ted Bundy and her being his next victim. Both his children recognised Ted and pointed him out of the mugshots that they were shown. However, the van had actually been long since discarded by Bundy, and he was set towards Pensacola, Florida in a new stolen car. This time he managed to find a vehicle that was more comfortable to drive, a VW Beetle. Officer David Lee was patrolling the area in West Pensacola when he saw an orange VW. He knew the area well and most of the residents, and yet he had not seen this car before. Officer Lee decided to run a check on the license plate and found that the car was stolen. He turned on his lights and followed the VW. Once again, Bundy tried to flee. Then suddenly Bundy pulled over and stopped. Officer Lee ordered him out of the vehicle and told Bundy to lay down with his hands out in front of him. To Lee's surprise, he began to handcuff Bundy, but suddenly Bundy rolled over and attacked him and ran away. But as soon as he did, Lee fired his weapon at him. Bundy dropped to the ground, pretending to have been shot. Lee then approached him again and tried to handcuff him, and again Bundy attacked him. However, Lee was able to overpower him this time, and Bundy was handcuffed and taken to the police station. He had finally been caught. The months following Bundy's arrest, investigators were able to compile evidence against him in all the murders and attacks. The white van that had been stolen by Bundy was found, and they had 3 eyewitnesses which had seen him driving the van in the afternoon of Kimberly's disappearance. Forensic tests were conducted on the van, and fibres were found of the material that had come from Bundy's clothes, so it tied the van to him. Kimberly Leach's blood type was also found in the van. They also had semen and Ted's blood type on her underwear. Further evidence was Ted's shoe impression in the soil located next to the place where Kimberly was found. Police felt confident that the information that they had, which tied Bundy to the Leach case, and on the 31st of July 1978, Bundy was charged with the girl's murder. Soon after, he was also charged with the Chi Omega murders, and Ted faced the death penalty for this. He would plead his own defence that he was not guilty of any of the murders. He faced 2 murder trials, both spaced within 3 years of each other. His first trial date was set for the 25th of June 1979 in Miami, Florida. This court case centred around the brutal attacks in the Chi Omega house of the sorority sisters. The second trial was to take place in January 1980 in Orlando, Florida, where he was going to be tried for the murder of Kimberly Leach. The opening of the Chi Omega murder trial sparked immense public interest and a media frenzy. After all, Ted had been suspected of at least 36 murders in 4 states, and his name cast nightmarish images for everyone. Ted again decided to act as his own defence during the Chi Omega trial, and he was confident in his abilities to be able to be found not guilty. The jury, made mostly of African Americans, looked on as he defended himself against the murder charges, and it became clear early on that Ted was fighting a losing battle. There were 2 events in the trial that would sway the jury against Ted. The first was Nita Neary, who testified that she had seen Ted the night of the murders. While on the stand, she pointed to Ted as the man that she had seen leaving the building as she came home. The second event which swayed the jury was the testimony of orthodontist Dr. Richard Sovereign. While on the stand, he described the bite mark injuries found on Lisa Levy's body. As he spoke, the jury was shown a full-scale photo of the bite mark, which had a very unique pattern and matched Ted Bundy's teeth positions, as they'd actually taken an impression while he was in prison. And that would be the biggest piece of evidence which would link Ted to the murder. On the 23rd of July, Ted waited in his cell for the jury to deliberate. After 7 hours, they would return to the courtroom with a verdict. Showing no emotion, Ted listened as one of the juries read out, "Guilty on all counts." Ted was found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Bundy's sentencing trial was held on the 30th of July in front of the same jury. During the brief hearing, Ted's mother testified and tearfully pled for her son's life. Ted was given the chance to address the court but denied, and he was given the death penalty. He professed his innocence, claiming that the media was responsible for his misrepresentation in the courtroom. They decided that the method of execution would be the electric chair for Ted. After many delays, the Leach trial finally began in Florida. So he's already received the death penalty for the Chi house murders, but now he's having to do another trial for Kimberly Leach. However, Ted did not represent himself this time. Instead, he handed the responsibility to his defense attorney, Julius Alrianco and Lynn Thompson. Their strategy was to not plead not guilty, but to plead not guilty on reasons of insanity. A plea that was risky, but one of the few options that was actually available to them. The plea of insanity would be difficult for the jury to believe, as Ted had become increasingly agitated throughout the trial, unlike his previous trials. His composure had sort of disappeared. He was starting to fall apart at this point. Ted was barely able to control himself in the courtroom. There was no doubt on the onset that Ted's chances of being found innocent were bleak. He'd already been convicted of one murder, so why couldn't it be convicted of another? 65 witnesses were presented that had connections to Ted either directly or indirectly, and had connections to Kimberly Leach as well. One of the star witnesses had seen a man resembling Ted in a white van in front of the girls' school. However, the defense sort of rebutted this because the witness couldn't decide the exact day that he had seen this. Nevertheless, the testimony continued, and they presented even more convicting evidence against Ted. The most damning evidence was the fibre evidence which linked Ted's clothes and the van to Kimberly Leach. Exactly 1 month following the opening statement, the judge Wallace Joplin asked the jury to deliberate. On the 7th of February, after 7 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with the verdict of guilty. This verdict was immediately followed by a celebration by the prosecution. The 9th of February marked 2 years since Kimberly Leach's death, and it was also the day that the sentencing trial commenced for Ted. During the penalty phase of the trial, Ted shocked those in the courtroom when he interviewed defense witness Carol Ann Boone. During the questioning of Carol, the two caught everyone off guard when they exchanged vows. According to Florida law, this actually meant that they were legally married, which is just insane and was obviously what Ted was aiming for. However, he would spend his honeymoon alone on death row. However, Ted refused to give up. He was not going down without a fight. He believed that he still had a fighting chance. In 1982, he got the help of a lawyer and appealed the Chi Omega murder, the verdict of the death penalty. However, his appeal was denied. There's so much evidence against him, why wouldn't it be? Ted's execution date was initially set for the 4th of March 1986. On the 24th of January 1989, at about 7 a.m, the memory of Ted's atrocities would be burnt away forever when he faced the electric chair. Outside the prison walls stood hundreds and hundreds of people waiting to hear when he'd actually died. And when the news came that Ted was dead, there was huge roars of excitement. And then Ted's body left the prison in a white hearse. He was driven along the street as crowds cheered that he was finally dead. That is the end of the case of Ted Bundy. I know it was over 2 parts, so I hope you enjoyed this sort of... I know this is a case that a lot of people know, but I don't know if people know a lot of the details. I didn't know a lot of these details that I found when I was doing my investigation. So I hope you maybe learned something new about Ted Bundy, and let me know what cases you want me to cover in the future. Let me know what you think of Ted Bundy. Do you think he could have killed more people? Do you think he did start murdering at a very young age of about 14? Let me know in the comments down below. But I hope you all stay safe and well, and I will see you next Monday for my next Murderous Mind Monday, where we cover another notorious serial killer. Not too sure who it's going to be yet, but stay tuned to find out. And if you haven't already, subscribe down below so you don't miss my upcoming videos. But I will see you next Monday for my next Murderous Minds Monday. Stay safe out there, guys. Bye!